Okay, so I'm going to be talking about mocking REST APIs with Mockoon. Let's hope this works. So just an introduction, because there's a few places in here I've not seen. Everyone else, you're going to have to just listen to it again. I'm Ade. I've worked with PHP since 2004. I've actually been working with code since 1988, but hey-ho. I'm currently at Finova, a finance company, as a developer, and I've been since 2021. I do a lot of side project work as well, so I'm working with mainly EPOS systems and e-commerce, including the ones mentioned there. And I think this is my third presentation. I've been here since 2016 at least. It may have been earlier. This time I won't make the mistake. The last presentation I did was in June last year, and it was on Laravel Livewire. And I made the mistake of wearing a Laravel Livewire t-shirt, which made people probably think I knew what I was talking about. So I ended up with a lot of questions I had absolutely no clue of answering because I just didn't know. It was an introduction. So I'm just going to set the scene here for you. I'm used Mockoon for what I want to do with it. I am not an expert on it, but okay. So we'll go for that. So let's start. What is it? So REST API testing. So we all know as developers, we can write our own code. So we can write PHP unit tests or PES tests, and we can do mocking of the API endpoints if we just want to test them. But at the Finova, the company, and probably a lot of other companies as well, you've got your QA departments who probably want to write things like end-to-end acceptance tests. So that could be with like Playwright and things like that. And there'll be bits of the application where they need to go out and test connections to third-party applications. Now, you can't do that for real, you know. So what you want to be able to do is tell the application to connect to something different, so something that's a fake. But of course, they can't write code. So what do? So this is where the non-technical people come in and use Mockoon. Okay? So what this does, it gives you an application that sits on a port waiting, and it can actually pretend then to be your API. So I'm just going to use an example of how I've used Mockoon to allow me to perform an end-to-end test of an extraction from Shopify. So we're talking items, customers, master data, transactions. Now, if we had a Shopify instance, we could just connect to that. But of course, that's no good, because if any changes happen, it's going to break your tests, because the data that you're expecting to see in your test will change all the time. So it's best to save it somewhere and point the tests at this, and you know then they're static. And that's where Postman and Mockoon come in. So we can use Postman to call the API and return the data. So that could be a big JSON string, and then we can save it in Mockoon. And then the Mockoon server, as I mentioned, then runs on a designated port. Behave. Okay, so again, we can then save the data in Mockoon, it runs on a port, and you configure your application, your testing, to point at that port number and machine, rather than the actual third-party application. And as I say, it can present the data in whatever format you want, XML, JSON, or files. And I've put a note down here in case anyone's uses Postman. Postman also has the ability to provide mock servers too. We tried this first. The trouble is, it is chargeable by number of requests. Okay, an online service. But Mockoon is free. You can download it and use it locally, or put it in a Docker container and connect to it remotely. They do offer an online service as well, but if you've got something free, why bother? So I was a bit worried because I was sat right at the back and there was a lot of things where I couldn't even see data. So I'll talk you through it. So first of all, I get data from Shopify using Postman. And we all know and love Postman. Okay, and on this one, I can limit the data returned because I don't want to return thousands of items. So I've got a URL with a limit of 5 on it, and back comes some data that I can use. And now we have Mockoon, and we can paste it as a new endpoint. So in Mockoon, you've got it defined here as an instance where it runs on a certain port number. You define your endpoint name, so customers.json, so that equates to the name of the endpoint in Shopify. Note there's no URL parameters here at the moment. And then you can define one or more responses. So this is a good response, it's a 200, so that's fine. And it's saying that basically, when you call Mockoon with an endpoint of customers JSON, the OK one will return you the data you want. And you can edit it in here, so you can actually like anonymize it. There are alternate status codes, so all your responses you can define exactly what they relate to. So here we can say, if you then do your test and call it with and expect a 401, it will bring back the data you want. So you can define multiple responses for the single endpoint for the different status codes. Okay. And now, I said earlier that you defined the URL endpoint, so customers.json, but there were no URL parameters. Okay. Now, an example in Shopify, the products endpoint, products.json, can be used in lots of different ways if you pass different endpoint, URL arguments to it. It can be returned proper product data. Or you can say, I only want a field called vendor, and that means it just lists some vendors. Okay? So how do you do that within Mockoon? Because it's still just products.json, products.json. So to do that, in Mockoon, you have a single endpoint with two responses. So you can have two 200s that are okay. But then each response can have a rule to define why it should be picked. So we've got an endpoint here called products.json, another one called products.json. Okay? And we've got, this one returns a list of vendors. And the way that it knows how to choose that one is because it says, when the application calls this endpoint with a query parameter containing vendor, then it will return this response rather than the full product response. Okay? So you can have multiple rules on an individual endpoint to say why it should be chose. And then, against all the endpoints, you can define also which one becomes the default. So if nothing matches, this is the catch-all. Okay? So that's a simple case there, where you've got, say, products.json vendor. But we know that URLs don't really look like that anymore now. They tend to look like the next one, root parameters. So if you have endpoints that contain root parameters, e.g. order/order number /transactions.json, you can define rules for these as well. So what you can do is you can mark where the numbers or the values go with a colon followed by some letters. It could be anything. That could be colon Harry or whatever. But I've called it colon ID. And then you base the rules on that. So what we have then is response 1 is for an order called that. And what it will do, it will choose this response if the root parameter, not query parameter, equals that number. And then that means then if you're running an application off of Shopify and you're saying return me 5 orders, and then for each one of those orders I need to get the actual transaction details off of each one, you can then define multiple responses with the same endpoint, but then based on what the order number is, you get the data back for that specific order. Okay? And that means then you've got the ability for your calling application just to pretend it's calling, say, Shopify, to get 5 order numbers, and then for those 5 order numbers, get their details and bring them in. Okay? So, yeah, very useful. Well, I found it useful. Okay. And there you go. I made these quick. Okay. So all I've done here is, if you've got any questions, hopefully not, some links, and finally me. Thank you very much. And I'll take questions as well if you've got any. I thought I saw a hand going up.
Yeah, I think I've been desperately trying to remember which one we use in our team. I think we use Mockery. Have you ever done a shootout between Mockery and Mockoon? Have you got a preference?
No, I've only used Mockoon. We started by trying Postman, but then when we found that there was limits on it, we went straight to Mockoon.
Oh, Postman are pivoting to such a commercial model now.
Yeah.
Switch to Bruno. That's the open source version of Postman. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, good talk. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. Okay. Oh, that went well.